Hello and welcome to Unity 101 Week 8. And yeah, this is going to be the last week. So I'll be here. My name's Nelson, and so will Mr. Gavin Whitlock.
Hello.
Hey.
I did an excited hello.
That was a very excited...
Enthusiasm added.
Yes, enthusiasm is good. Enthusiasm is magic. Okay, so today we're going to go over some UI stuff.
Woo!
So the new stuff that we're going to be covering, we're going to be going over some UI stuff. We're going to be talking a little bit about texture import stuff. And then, we're going to fix a few bugs with the current program. And then we'll be open for Q&A.
Well, we've got a little bit to cover at the end as well on actually building out the different ways.
Yeah, we're also going to be taking a quick look at the at building out to a web player, and I'll give everybody a nice little run through the HTML that's generated.
Cool. So where do you want to start?
Well, let's go ahead and start with the UI. First of all, actually, let's start with the bugs. Now, there's a small problem with the way that this current game is set up. If I go ahead and receive a bunch of points... Oh wow, this is really slow. Why is this so slow? Who built this game anyway? Seriously.
I blame Jeff.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so if we go ahead and get a few points in the first level, and then we fly into the second level and die, notice how our points gets reset to 0. That's going to be slightly problematic. We don't want that to happen. So what we want to go ahead and do is separate our points that we have accrued for a particular level versus the points that we have aggregated by completing levels. So to do that, I'm going to go with the simplest solution possible, which isn't typically the solution I would go with in this particular case. Remember, this code base is an introductory code base that we wanted people to get the feel for Unity, how it works, all the fun stuff that you can do within Unity. This isn't necessarily how I would go about doing it in the real world, but we have this kind of singleton thing called Game Manager. So I want to go ahead and abuse the fact that we have a nice little singleton, or we can add a nice little global variable thingy that will be differentiated from our currently used player points property that you can see there on line 26. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to rename player points. I'm just going to rename this to player points in level. And then I'm going to add another property called total player points. So now our player points and level is behaving the exact same way as our points did previously, including being rendered out to the user interface. However, I want the total player points to be what's ultimately going to be used to render out in the user interface, plus the player points and level. And then at the end of on the successful completion of a level, I want the total player points increased by the current player points level. So
I just want to point out for people that are following along that when Nelson changed player points to player points in level, the way he did that will have changed that throughout the code.
Right.
He didn't just... Yeah.
Exactly. I used the resharper shortcut Control-RR. If you just have Visual Studio, I do believe Visual Studio has a rename refactoring available. So if you right-click on it and go to refactor, that's the resharper menu. Blah, 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 blah. I have no idea. But
I think when the basic Visual Studio way of doing it is when you retype the name, you get that little drop-down, possibly.
Yeah, so let's try to say bleh. Yeah, then I get that little drop-down thingy right there that you can access by hitting Control-Dot. And you can say rename player points level to player and points and level bleh. So if you don't have ReSharper installed, that's the way to do it. Okay, so now let's jump to where our player points in level is being rendered. Now, the way that I want to go ahead and do this, and by the way, I'm using the super slick productivity power tools extension, which I don't know why I haven't showcased it before, because in my own coding I use it quite extensively. I just hovered over player points and level, opened up this awesome little drop down thingy, went to references, and double clicked on GUI label. So, as I discussed before, the way that I want this feature to sort of work is I want to have it render the total player points plus the player points in level. So that means I'm going to say manager total player points plus manager player points in level. Exactly what I said in English, but now represented in code. So by the way, who's following along here? Go ahead and hit participate if you guys are following along.
How many we got?
A handful, about 50%.
Cool.
So what I'm going to go ahead and do is the total player points is going to be increased every time you win a level. So that means I can jump into my finish line, not the Norwegian line, and when we collide with, we want to go ahead and increment out our stuff. So I can say manager total player points plus equals manager player points and level. Then I want to reset my player points to level to 0.
Yes, because you want to move those points rather than just copying them.
Yep. So now when I go ahead and hit play, let me go ahead and verify that this feature is indeed working the way I'd expect it to. And, oh wow, it's so slow. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so now I have 60 points, but when I die, I still have 60 points. However, well no, actually I have 0 points. Somebody broke my code. Who broke my code?
You did.
Did I? No. Da 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 blah blah blah. I never break my code. Ooh, you know what? I'm stupid. So the reason that I failed miserably is that I was handling the case where there is no other level left, as Mr. Dak just pointed out. So what I gotta do is I have to move this code down to the other branch. I also want to go ahead and reset my total player points to 0 at the start game screen. And that's because we don't want the total player points to continuously aggregate every time we play the game. So now if I go ahead and jump back into this and wait for a year as my spaceship flies through these gates.
You know, you could just, change the value of the variable.
Well, then I couldn't fly through the gates.
Ha, this is true.
I guess Phantom Walker's too cool to go to the Unity course.
Indeed.
Okay, and as you see, our points remain 60. However, now my points are at 70 and then 80 because I ran through those gates, but if I die, it gets reset back to 60. So that's exactly the behavior that I was looking for. So, go ahead and hit ready if you're done, 1 more minute if you're still typing, and not ready if you're just not paying attention.
Did you, you can do that other little couple of lines that I mentioned
Yes. Yep.
next, yeah. You see, as while people are waiting for people to talk, that is why I don't like rewriting my if statements that way round. Ifs and else's. I like the positive answer in the if you see what I mean.
Sure.
And it's partly that it didn't even occur to me that you'd put it in the wrong half of that.
No, because I had also assumed that like you said, the positive thing would be at the top.
It's one of those few areas where I always argue with ReSharper. You can reduce nesting. I know, but it will make my code really confusing.
So actually, there's a lot of people with one more minute. Do you guys have questions or anything? Because I'm going to go ahead and... Okay, we're back. So, what else? Okay, one other issue that we were running into. Now, this was something that is funny because I originally noticed this, but
Well, there was a thread on the forum, and I saw that you commented on it in the forums as well. Somebody brought up the point that when you die and go back to the start of a level, anything you've killed is already dead, and I had noticed myself, anything that's been activated stays activated, and so forth.
Right, and
it's a surprisingly easy fix.
Well, I just want to point out, though, that I had just assumed that was going to be the expected behavior. And then after talking with Gav and more consideration, we should probably make it so it resets.
Yes, essentially, you thought that was the intended behavior, and I didn't. and we both kind of assumed that the other had the same opinion. And then I went, no, you went, yeah, that's how we expected it to be. And I went, oh, well, yes, but... So anyway, we've got a couple of lines of code to tweak.
Right, so if we jump into our player on his destroy ship co method, up here on line 44, we're going to want to go ahead and basically recreate the level. So the first thing that we're going to do is, after we wait for 1.5 seconds, we want to destroy the manager.currentLevel, which, if you remember, is the game object that represents the instantiated prefab of the current level. Then what we're going to want to do is reinstantiate it. So that's also fairly simple. We'll do manager.currentLevel level equals, we want to do a cast to a game object. Oh, come on, really? You knew I meant that. So we want to instantiate our manager levels at manager current level index. So that will go ahead and reinstantiate our level for us. So then the next thing we want to do is we want to set our current level's transform's position to 0. So now if we go ahead and run this just to test it real quickly. So notice how I destroy that, but when I die, I come back and the level is entirely reset. And if I die again, the level is reset again.
If you could just go through to the next level and check that the other fix works with that fix, because it suddenly occurs to me that I haven't seen the two fixed in the same place.
I don't think that it should cause issues, but I'll check it out.
No, but it's the sort of thing that I'm always probably overly paranoid about.
Okay, so now I have 60, now I have 70. When I die, I should return to 60. Yep.
Sweet.
Okay, so go ahead and I'm going to reset everybody's ready. Ready if you're ready. Minute if you need minute. Not ready if you're not paying attention.
Indeed. There is only, was it 1 line of code, 2 lines of code?
Yeah, 2. Okay, I'll go ahead and pause. And we're back. So those are our bug fixes. Was there anything more, Gavin?
Not the Spring, what, code-wise, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing,
Well, actually, I
well,
want to.
other than the stuff that's related to the GUI stuff.
Yeah, I want to do one more thing. We did this during the open office hours. The problem is, though, is that code I
What did we
had
do?
was lost. So notice how our Explosion FX clones do not get destroyed.
Oh, yes, of course.
Now, I'll just go ahead and repeat that for today, just because. So one type of the particle effects doesn't automatically get destroyed when the particle system is no longer active. So what we can do to fix that is create a simple script we can attach to the instantiated particle effects that will automatically destroy itself when the particle system is no longer active. So I'm going to call this auto particle. How do you spell that?
Heavy.
Destruct.
Oh,
You said Ellie?
yeah, but Particle.
Okay.
Closer. Close enough.
Whatever. Okay, so this script will be attached to our stuff. So every time we do an update, what I want to go ahead and do is say if particle system is alive, so if not particle system is alive, destroy game object. So by attaching this script to any of our particles that we instantiate, what we'll get is they will be automatically destructed. So now if I go ahead and jump into my player barrel, notice how when we instantiate our, actually what I'm looking for is our explosion, when our explosion happens. And that happens over on our player projectile. So you'll see right here that we do this dot create explosion, which instantiates the explosion. So I'm going to change the create explosion method to look like this. Var game object equals game object cast. And of course, I'm not going to call it game object because that will conflict with the horribly inconsistently named property called game object, which is available on monobehavior. So I'm just going to sacrifice my own principles and name it GO for game object because of the poor design of the Unity API. And then I'm going to say go.add component auto particle destruct. So now when I jump into Unity, and make explosions happen, or try to make explosions happen, try harder to make explosions happen, there we go. You can see that the explosion FX objects are indeed deleted, and so all the garbage is cleaned up. So go ahead and hit 1 more minute if you need 1 more minute for this stuff. You guys should probably already have this implemented because you should have been here last week for open office hours. But I just wanted to go ahead and reiterate it for people who may not have been there and because I didn't actually have that code implemented on this version.
Maybe you could go and correct that while we're paused.
Correct.
Please.
Okay, so we're back, and the spelling has been corrected. And, yeah, I guess now it's time to talk a little bit about our UI. So right now, we don't have any really nice looking UI on the top left. It just says points 20, lives 3, and looks kind of ugly. Now, while I'm not going to necessarily prettyify it in front of everybody, I do want to show people how to go about doing that, because ultimately, at the end of the day, just like everything else, it depends on what you're looking for. So, what we need to do is introduce what's called a GUI skin into our application. Now,
Well, I was going to say, before you even do that, perhaps you could go through a few of the ways that you have in code with string handling, just in terms of like alignment. and point out some of the
String
things.
handling.
I know this is stuff that we've, like padding and the like in string dot format.
Oh, right. Well, we could go ahead and pad this, for example, by 4, by adding comma -4, and that will pad it to, I believe, the right by 4. And I don't think that's being... Actually, no, I think that is being respected. It's just because we're not with the monospace font, it's not going to look quite right. So you can play around, and we did discuss the string.format stuff in great detail, I believe, in C# 102, and you can play around with that stuff. But because it's not a monospace font, it's going to be difficult to kind of get them to line up right.
Yeah, sure.
But what we do want to be able to do is go ahead and modify some of the properties of the rendering of our GUI. And to do that, we use what are called GUI skins. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to create a new folder within my project called GUI, and I'm going to add a new GUI skin. So that's, again, going to the Create menu option and saying GUI skin at the bottom. And I'm going to call this Playing Game State HUD. So if you select the GUI skin on the right-hand side, you'll notice a bunch of settings. Now, I'll go over these in a little bit of detail in a moment here, but what you first need to do is find a way to actually apply this GUI skin. Yeah, if you want to use NGUI, that's fine. I'm just going over the existing stuff within the framework of Unity.
Yeah, we won't be covering any add-ons in this, just because we're dealing with the plain vanilla version that everyone's got.
Right. So what we need to do is we need to apply this GUI skin to the GUI.skin property. So if we look up here on our render method of playing game state, if we do GUI dot, there's a property called skin. And by setting the skin property, what will have happen is a variety of different styles will be applied to the different elements that we can render with GUI. So what we really need to do here is get our GUI skin referenced somewhere into our project. And the easiest way to do that is just to continue to abuse the game manager class. So I'm going to jump into our game manager class and add a public property. It's going to be public GUI skin playing game state HUD, and it's not going to be assigned to anything, or nothing's going to be assigned to it, whichever way that works. So now if I jump back into Unity, notice how playing game state HUD has appeared in our inspector. Now I can just click and drag our GUI skin over onto our playing game state HUD. So now we've successfully sort of hooked up our GUI skin with our game manager. So the final step that we need to do to hook up this GUI skin into being used in our playing game state is to jump over to our playing game state, and in our render method above, do GUI.skin equals manager.playing game state HUD.
Now I imagine I pointed it out when we did the GUI.labels that are already there, but GUI.skin is something that can only be set during the course of, or rather can only be called from on GUI. Now the reason that we can do it from this render method is that is in itself being called from an on GUI.
Right.
If you tried, because for instance, you might think, well, put this in start, put line 35 in start, because that, I only want to change it once when it's set up and leave it like that. You will get an error message from Unity if you try to do that, saying, well, exactly what I just said. It literally says you can't do that. You should only use this method in on GUI, which bugs me, frankly.
Yeah, the whole on GUI stuff, we haven't really discussed this quite a bit. Basically, on GUI is the whole GUI system is called it's an immediate mode rendering system where every frame or every couple times per frame, depending on the method called on GUI will be invoked. And that method is entirely responsible for printing out the entire GUI as instructions in C# code. So it's not like WinForms where you instantiate a control and you set it somewhere and position it. It's not like WPF or Windows 8 or Windows Phone Mobile or XAML. I guess I could just say XAML because XAML encompasses all that. It's not like XAML where you create a hierarchy of instantiated objects in XML once. It is literally when Unity says draw your UI, you must invoke every single method that will be responsible for drawing your UI. Meaning that if I were to have a condition in which my points or lives was not displayed, those elements would simply disappear on the frames that they weren't displayed. So it's not like by doing GUI.label we're instantiating some object that will stick around for a while. It's that we are literally printing out a label for this particular frame. So keep that in mind because that will be your number one tripping point with all Unity user interface stuff ever in your life.
And presumably that has a direct effect on things like draw calls and...
Yeah, the GUI system isn't as efficient as it could be. So there is that. But yeah, so I'm going to, before we go on break, I am going to do a few fun things. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my GUI font. Well, actually, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate how we can modify our GUI. So notice how our GUI is up here on the top left, and I have, I don't know why that happened. And I have my GUI skin selected. I can actually go in and modify, for example, maybe I want to jump into my label and set its font size up a little bit. And you'll notice how that has absolutely no effect whatsoever. As in, it's not doing a single thing. Okay, debugging time.
I think that might be because of the settings within the Arial font itself. Try changing the font first. Because it needs to be set up to be a dynamic resizing font if that's going to work.
Okay. So actually I'm going to to verify that I'm going to do a simpler test. I'm just going to change the color to red. And as you notice, if I change the color to red, our color is now red.
Cool.
So that's how you can go ahead and modify your UI while you're in the game. So that's a neat little tidbit of featuresness. So let's go ahead and add in a font. So I'm going to create a new folder called fonts, and I'm going to go grab a font off my hard drive. So I'm going to jump into Explorer, jump into C, Windows, Fonts. And what was that font that you liked, Gavin?
Ochre Extended.
So I'm going to...
And it does kind of go with this sort of game.
Yeah, so I'm jumping down to OCR A Extended. Now the cool thing about the way the fonts folder works in Windows is I can go ahead and click and drag it
Drag and drop
into the project folder directly. And now you'll notice we get a nice little font here in our fonts folder.
The interesting thing about that is actually that if you actually expand that out in the project hierarchy, you can actually see the material and texture that have been generated for it. Now, these are both black to start with because until you actually run the game, there's nothing there. And I can't remember if it keeps hold of it on dynamic, but if you run the game once, you'll have to use the font, I suppose.
Yeah, and to use the font, I just jump into my GUI skin, and I'm going to go up to Font at the top, select this little circly thing, and double-click OCR or text. And now I run again, and it doesn't look like it's quite wanting to update.
Yeah, there it is.
But anyway, as you can see up here in the top left, our font is indeed changed, and I do believe that this font will allow...
If you click on the font texture, you can see it's actually adding characters as they get used.
Okay.
It's because you got your preview window shut down.
Ah, right.
But yeah, I just thought was worth pointing out because it is a nice feature is that it will only actually use the necessary amount of memory, I suppose, for the letters it's used. But I wanted to just briefly mention the settings on the fonts. If you could click on the actual font itself there. The principal one being the line that says character is set to dynamic. Just make sure that that's the case. And that just ensures that if you have different sizes of that font, they can all be rendered from this one. If you set that to a specific thing, it will you will only get one size of the font, is what I'm saying. You'll have to create different versions in different sizes. But that's all I wanted to mention there.
Alrighty. Okay, so let's go ahead and
Just out of interest, MMO does says he has his GUI.skin call in his start, and it worked.
Okay.
Which I hope I mean, that sounds interesting.
Well, I can go ahead and put it in my constructor and see what happens. Keep in mind that this GUI skin is supposed to be specific to our playing game state, so that's why I'm kind of trying to localize it to our playing game state. Well, I'm now getting an error. You can only call GUI functions from inside on GUI.
Although he says he's got his inside of the start method, which we don't actually have a start method on that particular class because...
I'll try putting it on Game Manager. And I get the same exception. So...
That's what I was expecting to see. That's weird.
Yeah. Alright, so let's go ahead and pause and have about 10 minutes, and after that we'll go over in a little bit more detail our nice little GUI stuff, play a little bit with our GUI layout, and then will be a Q&A time. So I'll see you guys in a minute.
And the build stuff.
Yeah, and build stuff. And we're back. So we have our GUI stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and actually set our, I'm going to hit run, and I'm going to tell this to, well, there we go. I'm going to kill that. Then I'm going to set the, or no, not the player speed, lateral. What am I looking for? I'm looking for
Shouldn't you be in your GUI skin?
Level scroll speed. There we go.
Ah, right.
I just wanted to go ahead and pause the level. So our GUI stuff, it's fairly straightforward.
Well, as if you've been exploring through these, you'll have noticed immediately that you've got a lot of the same things under a lot of
Well, in fact, they're all the same.
The main options.
They're all the same.
Well, I'm assuming that some of them have things that others don't.
No.
Well, but do they not?
Nope. They're all the exact same. All of these things are what are called GUI styles. And a GUI style is just literally these properties. And they're all the exact same. Which means you could theoretically have a label act just like a button if you wanted to. The difference is that what you do, when you do GUI.label, it uses the label GUI style. If you do GUI.button, it uses the button GUI style. Notice how the button already has some stuff filled out. So for example, the background is button, and the hover has button hover, and the active has button active, and the focused has none, and so on. So what you can do with this is you can go ahead and change things like colors. So if I want to change the color to like red, but I wanted the hover color to be not red. Now you'll notice that absolutely nothing is happening with my particular things, because it's not quite doing what it should do. So it looks like the no, this slightly my bad. When working on CGS, the way that I had things set up was that I was literally passing in GUI styles into everything, and I was indeed using GUI labels with GUI styles that had things like hover and stuff like that, and that still actually worked. So for some reason, it looks like some of these properties are in fact ignored on certain attribute or on certain properties.
That's what I was getting at before. I assumed that they'd actually left them out, but it would seem that they're just not active.
Right. So the only other interesting things are the padding. We can move the padding left and right. We can move the margin left and right. Oh, it doesn't look like it responds to margin either. I believe margin is only used in GUI layout.
Is it not related? Oh no, I'm thinking of border. I think, which
right.
is
borders
related to
the background.
Yes.
So then we can do stuff like set our font, image position if we have a background image set, our alignment. So for example, I could do upper center if I wanted to, whether or not we want word wrap, what behavior we want in text clipping, our content offset, which as you see just offsets our content, not surprisingly. Fixed width, fixed height. These are used, and they're basically overriding what we've passed into the rect of our thing. Then we have font size, which isn't compatible with the current font we're working with at the moment. Font style, which is also not compatible with the font that we're working with, and stretch width and stretch height. And both of these are only really used in GUI style or GUI layout. So I'm going to actually back up real fast, and I'm going to go ahead and rewrite our GUI stuff really quickly to use GUI layout instead. Now GUI layout is neat in that it kind of gives us an automatic positioning framework where we don't have to pass in necessarily absolute positions into the recs. And that gives us access to a few more of the properties that we might be able to want to take advantage of in our different elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say GUI style or GUI layout dot begin horizontal or begin vertical. Now a GUI layout dot vertical is a GUI layout area that represents stacked elements vertically, not surprisingly. And you'll notice that what I do whenever I use GUI layout, I always match the begin and end in between curlies. Now these curlies do nothing, well, except for define a new scope, of course. We've discussed this before in previous C# classes. They just define a scope. But it does lead things to be a lot easier to read when you add superficial scopes into your GUI layout code. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use GUI layout.label. So you'll notice there is everything in GUI, almost everything in GUI is in GUI layout. So we have GUI layout.label, we have a button, we have a repeat button, we have a toggle, we have everything that we want. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a label. Now notice the method signature. The method signature does not take in a rectangle, unlike the GUI.label, and that's because the rectangle is computed by the GUI layout engine. So I can actually get away with literally just passing in the text that I want this particular label to have. So I'm going to do that just by yanking out our different bits of content that we have on both of our GUI layouts. So what I've essentially done is I've created a GUI layout, a vertical stacked layout with our points in our lives. So now if I go ahead and hit run, notice how we now have that behavior. with this. So let's go ahead and see about modifying our skin a little bit to have that work properly. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into our label, and so I have our fixed width and our fixed height. My fixed width actually got set. Actually, all of my settings got repeated, it looks like. Or not repeated, but I'm going to go ahead and zero out.
Set.
Yeah, they all got set. And left set. Okay, so I think my content offset was also set as well.
Actually, if you go, because padding, border and things like that aren't 0 by default, but if you go up to the top, there is a reset button at the top in the inspector.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just hit reset, and that zeroed everything out as well. So what I want to go ahead and do is now we can take advantage of margin and padding. So let's go ahead and give our labels 5 pixels of padding on each side, and give our margin maybe 10 for, or maybe 5 for a top margin. Actually, it doesn't really matter. The difference between margin and padding doesn't matter unless you're using a background image. If you're using a background image, then the padding applies to between the content and the background, and the margin applies outside of the background between different elements. But as you can see,
You could actually just pick a random texture and just drop it in there as a background image. It might make it a little bit clearer.
yeah, so I can go ahead and jump into our background, and I can give this a background of, I don't know, a player ship, which looks really bad. But now you'll notice that if I increase the top padding, notice what happens. The background gets increased as well. But if I increase the top margin, notice what happens there. The background moves along with the content. So that's the fundamental difference between a background and a margin, or a padding and a margin. And it's not going to matter unless you're using a background image.
Do you want to talk about while you... Oh, lag beat me. If you get an image up, actually out of those images, if you've got something that's more, less picturey, that you could use there, please.
What?
Show me the textures menu. I'm looking for something that might have an edge, recognisably. Well, yeah, any of the swirly smoke, perhaps.
This?
Anything like that. Just to show border, particularly is quite an important one when you're dealing with this.
Well, a border is a funny one. Basically, what the border determines is when should...
It's the number of...
It's the number of pixels...
It's the number... Okay, you do it then.
It's the number of pixels that you do not want to be stretched.
For instance, like the click and drag box selection box that appears, just as part of Windows and indeed Unity. You've got this outer edge of light blue and then the semi-transparent blue inside it. Now, if your background image is that's a typical sort of representation of a background for a button. Say you have a particular border that makes it look a bit solid, and then the internal colour. Now, when the button gets resized to be the right size on the screen, the border that you specify for each side of it allows you to avoid any stretching of border elements, such as beveling, so that all the bevels will still stay the same size. It just enables you to ignore a certain border all the way around the edge, like a picture frame.
Right. Otherwise, what would happen is, as I drag this box to be larger, the original texture that was used to present this, that sharp border that you see would be stretched, and it would look blurry.
Yes, the border would get thicker and thicker and thicker to keep it in scale with the rest of it.
Right.
We made that sound way more complicated.
Well, it does take a little bit of time to get your head around, but it's basically the border. If you guys are familiar with CSS, you'll know that you can specify the border for any element. and you can specify like a solid border or a dashed border or whatever. In Unity, it's not like that. The border is a facet of the background image itself, and you have to tell Unity what bit of the background image constitutes the border that you're trying to represent. I don't think I helped. Does anybody have any questions about border? Well, you know what? We have the technology.
I was going to say, it wouldn't be the most complex. I was literally about to boot up Photoshop myself and make one. You might as well. Do you want me to do that and you can talk about something else?
It's launching on my top monitor right now.
Okay, cool.
Da-da-da-da.
Bring it on the screen. Yeah, there.
So I'm going to do a 32 by 32.
This means you can actually literally, if your border is like a border color and a central color and nothing else other than that, you can get away with a 9-pixel image for a button background. 1 pixel surrounded on each side by 1 pixel.
Right.
You've got 4 on the left.
Yeah, I just noticed that. And then I'm going to fill this in with something fun. Give me my blending options.
The same color.
Well, I meant to do something fun. There we go.
Oh, very iTunes. Changed it.
Okay, so what I have here is a 32 by 32 image with a blue 3-pixel border around it and a nice little gradient in the center. So if I zoom out, it looks like that. So I'm going to go ahead and save this out as a PNG, and I'm going to dump it straight into my assets folder. If I can find where that is on my hard drive.
If you can find your hard drive.
Well, yeah, I don't know which hard drive it's on. And the problem is it doesn't. The stupid thing is dumb.
Are all your hard drives named as well?
No. My hard drives are named local disk, storage, more storage, external 1, and external 2. I think I remembered where I stuck this. See, I normally do because I have a shortcut in my Explorer window, but for some reason this stupid 3D use courses. Okay, there it is. The save dialog for Photoshop doesn't actually show me my shortcuts. All right.
I normally just save things to the desktop and then drag drop them into Unity, which makes a copy in the project anyway, and then you put one on the desktop.
Okay, so I just saved out a texture into my folder called label background. So that's the texture that we just pulled in. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump back into my thing and change the background to label background. So notice how it looks really ugly right now, but I can fix that by giving it a 3-pixel border around each side.
If you make them considerably bigger, it'd be even easier to see.
You mean make my border bigger?
No, make the whole make them like make the padding about 50 on each of those.
Yeah.
And then turn off your borders.
So this is what it would look like without borders. Notice how the border bit got all stretched, but by giving it the proper border value, they're no longer stretched. And now we can also show the difference between margin and padding a little bit better. If I give these guys a 10-pixel padding, notice how 10 pixels appeared between these two buttons, or these two labels. So now if I go ahead and give it a more reasonable padding of like 5, that should look pretty good. And then I'm going to give these both a fixed width. So I'm going to jump into fixed width. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say stretch width. What stretch width does is it will stretch the width to the width of the container. So remember how these are both in the container of that vertical? Now, because the points bit made it a lot longer, as in the points bit made it stretch the container a little bit, by hitting stretch width on all the labels, it will stretch to fill what the points label has caused the vertical to be. Now we can
Presumably, if you can go through and score enough points to get it over 100, it will stretch out mid-game.
Yes. I'm also going to go ahead and give the alignment a middle left.
Yes.
But like I've said, if I got more than 100 points, I'm not going to try to get more than 100 points. But if I did, it would get, both of these labels would get larger. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the GUI stuff? Yes, it's not pretty. How dare you insult my awesome GUI? Actually, you know what made this look better? I'm going to go ahead, instead of doing a horizontal, or vertical, I'm going to do a horizontal. Destroy that turret so it doesn't bother me, and then go into my game manager and set my level scroll speed to 0 before I run into it. Okay, so notice how my everything just actually completely failed. That's because I believe I don't have the stretch height set. Okay, well that isn't good. Ah, derp. I was beginning 2 horizontals. This happens a lot. That's why I would recommend making helper methods like private void, horizontal, action, and then do GUI layout dot begin horizontal, GUI layout dot end horizontal, and then invoke the delegate in the middle. So then I can replace this code with simply horiz.
For those of you, we will resume 101 service momentarily.
But I just wanted to point out,
For those of you who are up on our current C# classes,
right?
this is a tidier way of going about things.
Right, exactly. So if you do understand this structure, I would recommend doing something like that because it reduces the amount of errors that you could run into. But for now, I'll just leave it as boring. If I can find my Y key.
You mean Z?
Huh? No. Undo is
You
Control
mean
Shift.
undo?
Okay.
It's Control Z.
Oh, right, I'm undoing, not redoing. That's probably why I couldn't find my Y key, because there was nothing to redo.
Wow!
Hey, I told you I had...
That's impressive.
I think I time traveled for a second.
Undo and redo confused. That is impressive.
Yeah. Okay, so now now we should have something that looks not bad. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump into our change the level scroll speed to 0. Jump back into this. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the top margin. Instead, I'm going to give it a left margin of 10. Or maybe 5. So yeah, so that looks kind of pretty.
Kind of pretty.
Kind of pretty. I don't think GUI handles anything like that. I can change putting a score made by graphics.
No, it does actually. If you flip over to code, because this is something that I was about to bring up, which is at the moment. Now, as we've mentioned, there are things, you've got labels, you've got buttons, and blah, 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 blah. What we haven't talked about are the overloads that are available, and what you can actually put into label and box and button. Because if you actually look at your overloads list for label, one of the options you have is a thing called a GUI content.
Hmm.
And also you can see just directly you can have images to put in there. So you can simulate like a fake button by making a label that's just got a picture of a button in it. But GUI content is, well, Nelson, do you want to
Then it's
go
just
into that?
whatever content that you want to represent.
It is, but there's, I was hoping you'd put it in more coding terms as to what it is. It's basically an aggregation of any sort of content. Your explanation was basically as far as I was about to go with it.
Well, then we're on the same page.
Okay, then.
But yeah, you can represent text and images with this stuff. The last thing that I kind of want to do, what's the field for playing games? State HUD. That's on the manager. It's a GUI skin or a GUI style.
No, it's a GUI skin.
Yeah, GUI skin.
And I've alluded to this, but I'm going to mention it explicitly here, which is that you could actually have, if you had alternate skins, you can use GUI.skin in between those two different labels so that you had two different skins if you wanted.
Right.
The other option would be to use something called a GUI style,
Right.
which these skins are a collection of, as Nelson mentioned earlier, and those you can pass in on a per call basis to label and box, or indeed to the begin horizontal, as you can see here, under the top overload.
Right, and that's what I was going to go over really quickly here is you can actually go ahead and combine the two things where you can add what are called custom GUI styles to a skin. So like Gav said, you can actually style out our horizontal. So I'm going to go ahead and do that because I want there to be a background image on our horizontal and I want there to be some padding. So I'm going to pass in begin horizontal GUI.skin.find style, and I'm going to pass in header horiz. So what this will do is this will pass in a custom style called header horiz into the begin horizontal method. So to actually go about defining this custom GUI style, I can jump back into the inspector, and I'm going to stop running really quickly. And I'm going to open up the custom styles. Now the custom styles is a bit annoying and cumbersome to work with. If we wanted 10 custom styles, we would type in 10, and we get element 0, element 1, element 2, and so on. Well, right now we only want one custom style, so I'm going to keep that at 1. But however, we also need to name it. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a name, header horiz. Notice how that name is now reflected within our custom styles list. So now that I have that custom style in place, I can go back into the game. I'm going to blow up that turret, and then I'm going to change level scroll speed back to 0. Now I'm going to jump into my custom style, and I want to give it a background of the metal hex grid. Then I want to give it a padding of 10, or actually no, I don't want a left padding because I already have a left margin on our doohickey thing. But I want to give it a right padding of 5, a top padding of 5, and a bottom padding of 5. So notice how I'm now styling the element that appears behind our points and lives labels. And I'm doing that through a custom style.
It's very much like the way a game object is, an empty game object is. There's nothing tangible there. It's just a point in space. And with what you've done here with the begin GUI layout.begin areas, setting things there, actually that space is a representation of the area itself. And by using this custom style in this particular way, you've actually made it visible on the screen.
Right.
But obviously, other than once you've got each custom style set up, it's it's got all the same options that you've got on everything else.
Yep. So, and then keep in mind you can also pass in custom styles, like Gav said, into label and button and all that stuff. They all take in some overload with GUI style. So you can customize any particular element that you want, either by resetting the skin to something different or by using custom styles. The last thing I want to go ahead and do is show the final bit of overloads that you will see a lot of when using GUI layout, and that's the GUI layout option params. This option appears on every single overload. What it is it's a params, meaning you can pass in as many arguments as you want into this parameter. You get GUI layout options from the GUI layout class, and then you do dot, and a few of these methods return GUI layout options that will override the positioning or width of an element. So for example, if I wanted to give this horizontal a custom width of 300, and for some reason I didn't want to do this in my custom style, maybe 500. I didn't want to do this in my custom style, I wanted to do this in code. Maybe it changed over time or something. Then I can do that by passing in GUI layout.width. Now if I jump back into my code, or into my game, and notice how the width of the entire thing is now set to 500. And if I jump into my labels again and maybe give it a stretch width, notice how by saying stretched width, it's now stretching the width across as much as it can in those cases. Alternatively, I could give it a fixed width to some sort of thing that makes it equal, like that. All right, so that's really about it as far as GUI stuff. Are there any questions that people have about GUI stuff? Or at least about styling labels?
If you're interested in digging deeper into the layout options, because they are accessible on a lower level, and my recommendation would be to read through the scripting reference on Unity.
Yeah.
Because it's quite clear if you know your way around code.
I think everybody fell asleep, because I don't see any activity.
They're all having fantastical creative ideas and going wild with on GUI. I'll tell you one thing you can do, which is a nice little rounding off fix, which is to change your background, your clear color for your camera, back to black.
Yeah.
So that nasty pink line goes away.
And so no more pink line. Okay, so that's almost about it for what we wanted to cover today, but we did want to go ahead and discuss really quickly building out to a web player. So if anybody has questions...
Well, and building out in general.
Well, yeah, building out in general, I don't necessarily know if we've actually talked about this quite yet. So if we go to File and Build Settings, you'll notice that we have this little menu option where we can choose Web Player, PC Mac Standalone, Flash Player, which is, I guess, a pre-release version, iOS, Android, Xbox 360, PS3, and Wii.
And as you can see, your mileage will vary depending on what version and how many of the particular licenses you happen to have got.
Right. So in this particular case, I can only build out to Web Player, PC, Mac, and Standalone, and Flash Player. I can't build out to iOS because obviously I can't do that in Windows. I don't think I have the license for it either. And then I can't do any of these because I don't have the license for it. So if I jump into PC, Mac, and Standalone, I can go ahead and say Build. And what that'll do is it'll open up a save dialog box where I can place a build.exe anywhere on my hard drive. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder called build-blah inside of my Unity course folder, and I'm going to hit save. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a production-ready build for my version of the game. So if I open that up in Explorer, you'll see we have build.exe, but we also have build data. Build data contains basically the Unity runtime as well as the bits and pieces from Mono that it needs to run.
Yeah, that is one thing that I do quite like. I assume it's standard, but I first came across it with Unity, which is it does just pick out the bits that you need from a lot of the libraries.
Yes.
And provides it all as one little neat, tidy package, which is, I thought, very nice.
So then if you run this, you'll have the option of setting your resolution and playing. And as you'll notice, we now have the game actually running inside of a little window. Now the other option that I wanted to quickly go through is the web player. So if I go into web player, I'm not going to cover all of these different options, but I do want to quickly point out that if I go ahead and hit build, we get the same sort of thing that happened before, but this time it's asking us to select a folder. So I'm going to go ahead and select I'm going to create a new folder called build web, and I'm going to say select folder. And what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead and build out a web player version of my game. Now, if I open up web player, you'll notice there's two files, the webplayer.html and the webplayer.unity3d. The webplayer.unity3d is your actual game. That's the thing that's going to actually be downloaded and loaded onto whatever client is going to be running your game. But if I jump into webplayer.html, you'll notice we have our game running in this case, Chrome, because I have the Unity plugin for Chrome installed on my machine. So a few other quick notes about the HTML that's generated. A lot of people would like the ability to sort of customize the HTML that's generated, so I kind of wanted to point out the things that you don't want to mess with. You don't want to mess with this. This is going to load in the JavaScript that's required to interact with the web player, essentially. Nor do you want to play with this code right here. This is the JavaScript that's responsible for actually embedding the Unity player. And you'll notice something funny right here. We have the webplayer.unity3d. So this is an actual file reference to your file that's going to be downloaded to play your game, as well as a resolution right there that you can change to whatever you want.
Those are particularly of note. If you get for those of you like me who are sort of comfortable with coding but not specific, don't particularly know anything about writing web pages, which is that simply if you get this set up the way you want, you can simply, if you do a new build for the web, you can just replace
exactly,
the Unity 3D
Unity 3D
file,
package, and not the actual HTML file.
So you can either match the names of and overwrite it, or you can change the reference on line 16 here, because that literally is the file that will be picked.
Yeah.
So in my case, when I set that up for something, I used the short Dropbox link to my public folder.
And a few other things to note. These little guys, I cannot believe that they still do that on CSS and JavaScript. That's something that people used to do like 10 years ago. So you can get
what comments?
Well, no, they're HTML comments inside of JavaScript and CSS for browsers that don't understand JavaScript or CSS. It's a very, very, very archaic way of dealing with browser compatibility with browsers that came out 15 years ago. And it annoys me like no other. But the point is you can go through, you can edit all of this CSS, you can edit all of this markup. The only bits that you'll really want are is this div right here. Notice how the div has an ID of Unity player. So you'll want that. And that's going to be hooked up with the JavaScript that's downloaded on the top of the page. And you'll notice right here that the Unity object is retrieved as the ID of Unity player. So if you wanted to change the ID of this div, you can, but you'll also have to update the JavaScript up here and down here. But if you wanted to, for example, bring a Unity player into maybe a PHP application or an application where you already have like a header and a footer and a layout, then that's all you really need to pull over. You just need to pull over a reference to the download web player. You need to pull over this bit of scripting code, and you need to pull over this div. And outside of that, you're pretty much golden. And you can make this look however you want. So the last bit about the web player is that if you jump into the web player and you click on player settings, by hitting player settings, it'll open up the inspector window. And you'll have a few different options. You'll have a black background option, a default option, and then a no context menu option. The no context menu option will simply insert some additional JavaScript that will prevent, and I'm finger quoting right now, right clicking. Because that's really dumb. But also notice you'll be able to change your default screen width and height. But of course, you can also do that within JavaScript. But yeah.
Well, and of course, the most important thing that you can all do on this particular inspector page, which is the icon.
Right.
Come on, you've got to have a cool icon.
So if I wanted to give the icon my ship, or my game lose, or something, I don't know. It really doesn't like any of these icons. Maybe they're probably too big. But yeah. Okay, so how's everybody feeling?
Is anybody feeling?
Is there anybody that feels?
I'll feel occurrences occurring.
Maybe. On feel enter.
On trigger.
Yeah.
Unity 205, Ponies of War.
I have a question. How can we create an option to quit the game so when we build a PC we can actually exit without Task Manager? That's going to be a method invocation called, I believe, the application.quit. Application.quit will quit your application. So if you just place like a on your update, you check for the exit button and then do application.quit, you can do that.
Well, you could go ahead and do that on the start screen, couldn't you?
Well, sure. So if I wanted to jump over into my start screen, I could
In
say...
fact, it would be handy, you could show buttons, because we've put labels, and you could actually use a button for start and quit.
Yeah, so if I wanted to do that on my start screen, I can go ahead and I'll say GUI layout.begin. Let's do a horizontal here. GUI layout.end horizontal. Then I can say if GUI layout.button.start, then do all this bit of code. Or if GUI layout.button quit, then do application.quit. So now if I go ahead and jump into Unity and hit play, we'll have two nice little buttons, which we won't actually have because I didn't place them in the onGUI method because I'm dumb. So I'm going to go ahead and cut all of this code out of update and paste it below the GUI.draw texture on render. So now I'm going to jump back into Unity and hit OK and hit play. And notice how we have a start and quit button. So if I hit quit, nothing happens. That's because the application.quit doesn't quite work right on in the editor mode. But if I hit start, notice how we start the game. But now if I jump...
Yes, if you think about it, you're in the editor. So what application is running, which is actually it's a little confusing. You actually have to do a build, and Nelson is just doing so. So I'm going to keep this sentence going until it has occurred, and he has a build he can use to show it.
Yep. So now I can hit...
There's no way of quitting when you're not actually in the application in the first place.
Yeah. That'd be hilarious if it did work, if it just shut down Unity.
Yeah.
But now I can hit the quit button up here, and you'll notice it goes away.
That's a good question. Thank you for asking that, by the way, Stephen, because that is the one thing that is, you see that a lot, it is inelegant. You play somebody's game and you go, oh, I've got to actually alt-tab out of it.
Okay, so now is the Q&A time for any questions you guys want to ask. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. Okay, and we're back. So that pretty much concludes Unity 101. I hope everybody...
Yeah, we may have...
We may have what?
We may have missed well, I think that you managed... We forgot to record a couple of minutes where we added some code that displayed two ponies flying around on the screen.
Yeah.
But I'm sure no one will be particularly bothered. No. Before we start getting letters, that didn't happen. That's just Nelson showing off something that made his 2-year-old mind laugh.
Yes, indeed. So anyway, I hope everybody, all the future people, had a good time, and we will be seeing you all for, well, more Unity stuff in the future.
And check out the C# and indeed the C++ and all the other classes that we've got on 3D Buzz.
Oh yeah, definitely check out the C# stuff, because that'll definitely help everybody who's working in Unity with C#.
Cool. So, goodbye to the future people.
Yeah.
Goodbye to the current people. And generally, goodbye.
And we'll see you guys later.